They didn't even call me. They just CC'd my betrayal. That's what I kept thinking as I stared at the text. It had come in at 3:08 p.m., a group message. My name, my parents, 2 uncles, both my aunts, my cousins, just sitting there, on screen, glowing like a curse under glass. After some thought, we've decided it's best if you take a step back from the family right now. We love you, but things have been tense, and it might be healthier to create some space for everyone to reset. I read it once, then again. Then I scrolled back up, looking for context I somehow missed. Maybe another discussion, a lead-up, a warning. But there wasn't any. They sent it like a business memo. No emotion. Not even an "are you okay?" or "let's talk." Just a decision they'd clearly all discussed. Without me, I looked up from my phone and waited for the numbness to wear off. It didn't. My hand was shaking, but my mouth, dry. I couldn't even tell if I wanted to cry or scream. It just felt like someone had erased me. Not argued with me, not punished me, erased me. I tried to remember the last time things felt okay. Maybe my cousin's birthday dinner? I wasn't invited, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe a small venue, a slip-up. But now, I realized it wasn't an accident. I had been edged out weeks before this message ever arrived. Quietly, bit by bit. The doorbell rang, and for a moment I snapped back into myself, thinking, maybe. They're here. Maybe it's a mistake, but it was just a package delivery. I opened the door and smiled at the guy like I hadn't just had my soul unplugged from its roots. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the message again. The words blurred. My parents' names were there, smiling next to tiny profile photos. My mother in pearls, my dad in sunglasses at a barbecue 2 summers ago. It made me sick how casual it all looked. Smiles stamped beside betrayal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What do I say to that? I could type, "Could we talk?" Or "Why?" Or just send back that dead-faced thumbs-up emoji. I typed 3 different responses and erased each one. Eventually, I just powered off my phone. I sat there in silence for what felt like hours. The buzzing in my chest got louder. It was like grief, but colder. Anger was somewhere underneath it. I could feel it trying to scratch through, but it hadn't broken the surface yet. When I finally stood up, I felt heavier. Like the air around me had shifted. Like walking through a pressure chamber. I wasn't kicked out of some dinner. I wasn't forgotten or overlooked. I was voted out of my own bloodline. By people who smiled to my face every Christmas. By the woman who used to braid my hair before church. By the man who taught me how to drive. And worst of all, by the 2 people who raised me. I didn't know what to do next. I just knew one thing. They wanted me out of their world. They had no idea I was about to build my own. The question looped in my mind like a broken song. What did I do? What did I do? I wasn't naive. Families don't just disown you overnight. This had been in motion a long time. It just took that group text to make everything snap into view. All the small slights, the weird silences, the subtle social surgeries. All of it had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Like my cousin's engagement dinner. The first obvious slap. I found out about it from someone's story on Instagram. Champagne flutes clinking, fancy candlelit decor, the whole group smiling at a table that used to have a seat for me. When I texted my mom about it, she played dumb. Oh, it was really last minute. Her parents organized it. You know how things go. But my cousin had planned that party for weeks. I'd even helped her look at options online months before. I wasn't just forgotten. I was removed. Then there were the comments. Little things. Nothing harsh enough to confront directly. Just enough to sink their claws in. Like when my mom came over and glanced around my apartment with that strained smile of hers before saying, "You know, your sister's place is small too. But it just feels warmer." Or when my aunt laughed that, of course not everyone needs a big career. Some of us just love quietly. After I mentioned staying late again to finish a nonprofit report. I started shrinking during conversations, pulling back from updates about my job or friendships. They either brushed it off or swapped the topic to someone else's wedding or baby or house flip. I was the only one without all 3. Maybe I was boring to them, too opinionated, too quiet, or too loud. I don't know. It started to feel like everything I did annoyed them. It wasn't always like that. There was a time when my mom would call just to hear about my day, when my dad used to send goofy videos and yell my name across the room just to hug me, when my aunt used to brag to strangers about my college scholarship. I didn't change. Not really. I just stopped performing for them. I moved into my own place instead of staying with family. I backed out of our group vacation because I couldn't afford it. I missed 2 baby showers because of work obligations. I didn't text back fast enough. I didn't gush over a cousin's fiancé who made a casually racist comment at dinner one time. I guess that made me difficult. But was that unforgivable? That group message made it sound like I was toxic, like I'd caused scenes, like I owed the family a version of myself I'd outgrown. All I ever wanted was peace, space to be myself, to be imperfect, to not be the family moral compass, just because I didn't co-sign things that made me cringe. Yet every time I chose boundaries, it felt like I lost a piece of my welcome. And still, I never saw this coming. I replayed all the holidays where I showed up anyway, all the times I swallowed a comment or complimented someone who never complimented me back. I remembered holding my cousin's crying baby while everyone partied, setting the table, picking up the slack, just because I was always the dependable one. But dependability gets boring. Respect gets quiet, and when you stop being convenient, they let you know, or apparently, they tell you to step away. That's what stuck with me the most. That phrasing. We think it's best. Like I was toxic waste they needed to distance themselves from. But the worst part? No one in that group message, not my mom, not even my favorite uncle, texted me privately afterward. No one said, "Hey, I'm sorry." No one asked if I was okay. Silence echoed louder than any insult. And it said what I hadn't wanted to face. They'd been drifting for a long time. They just finally decided to cut the cord. It started with curiosity. I told myself I was just looking for proof that I wasn't crazy, that this hadn't all come out of nowhere. So I went digging, not with revenge in mind, but clarity. Closure. I opened up our family group chat. Scrolled back months, then years. Text after text. Birthday reminders, holiday plans, baby bump selfies, forwarded jokes. But it didn't take long for the patterns to emerge. I had always been the last to respond. The forgotten lol 3 messages late. The one whose questions went ignored while everyone else got heart reacts and exclamation points and inside jokes. There was the thread from Aunt Carol's birthday. I'd asked if anyone needed help setting up. No reply. 2 lines later, my cousin Ashley offered cupcakes and the chat practically erupted in gratitude. I scrolled faster. There were entire stretches where I existed in silence, unless something was needed. Babysitting. Last-minute gift wrapping. Cooking assignments I didn't volunteer for, and then the screenshots. They weren't sent to me. They came from Jamie, my only cousin who still had a line of loyalty left. She didn't say much, just forward 3 screenshots and add, "I think you should see this. I'm sorry." I opened them and, yeah, there it was, my name. My personality. Picked apart in casual, ugly shorthand, Ashley. I mean, she just always makes things so heavy. Like, we're trying to have fun, and she'll bring up trauma or politics. My mom. Well, she thinks she's the only one who feels deeply. It's always been like that. Uncle Rob. That's just her personality. She'll grow out of it, or she'll just fade out. Fade out. I closed my eyes and let that phrase burn. Whatever mask my parents wore when they called me sensitive or compassionate, it had ripped right off in those texts. They didn't want to fix the relationship. They wanted me conveniently erased. I wasn't being protected from tension. I was being discarded because I didn't fit the flow, too emotional. Too different, too outspoken. To myself, I guess. The more I searched, the more cracks I saw. The family game had always been subtle. Reward the ones who conformed. Ignore the ones who questioned. My silence, my kindness, it didn't make me safe from their judgment. It made me invisible while they talked. Even in shared photos, I noticed it. I was always slightly off-center, unflattering angles, cropped smiles. In 10 years of family albums, I looked like a guest. Not a daughter, not a niece. Just a girl who showed up and smiled too brightly for people who never saw her. The texts weren't what hurt most. It was knowing they weren't new thoughts. They were beliefs hardened over years. Confirmed in little huddles at Thanksgiving dinners I thought went fine. Reinforced in car rides I wasn't invited on. Bubbled inside jokes I was never part of. It was a quiet exile, carried out with sweet smiles and clean hands. They didn't just one day stop loving me. They started treating me like emotional clutter. And I let them, hoping one more good deed, one more humble reply, might win me back some warmth. But in their eyes, I was the too much of everything girl who wouldn't fall in line. I didn't want to keep reading. But that old instinct kicked in. Maybe if I just understood more, it would hurt less. Spoiler, it didn't. By the time I closed my laptop, I'd confirmed what I hadn't wanted to believe. I wasn't becoming the black sheep. I had been branded one a long time ago. It was from Aunt Corinne. She hadn't been in the group message. Technically, she was family, but also not. The kind who came to holidays late, left early, didn't involve herself in drama. She was my mom's older sister by 10 years, but you'd never know it. Tattoos, short silver hair, linen, everything. An ex-artist turned therapist who people called intense when they meant honest. I hadn't talked to her in a couple of weeks. She lived a town over. We weren't especially close, but I remembered sitting on her floor once after a New Year's party when I was 13, whispering about how lonely school made me feel. She didn't talk like adults were supposed to. She listened like she'd been lonely too, so I texted back, "Are you sure?" Her reply came instantly, "Get up. Drive over. I'll make toast." And just like that, I was on the road in yesterday's clothes, my stomach too knotted to eat, driving past espresso stands and sleepy trees, holding on to her message like a life raft. When I stepped inside her stone cottage, it smelled like sage and sea salt. She barely waited before wrapping me in a hug, not quick or polite like my mother's, but full body, soul-lifting. Like she could feel every inch of damage I'd carried from the week. She stepped back, looked me in the eyes with those fierce, knowing brows of hers, and said, "I'm not going to ask what happened yet. Let's get you steady first." We sat at her kitchen table with mismatched thrift store mugs. She set out toast with Irish butter, cut apples, and hard cheese. It felt ceremonial, ancient even. And that's when I told her everything. The message, the silences before it, the screenshots. My parents' name in black text next to the worst lines. Corinne didn't interrupt, just sipped and nodded. When I finally asked, "Am I crazy?" her eyes snapped up like that word offended her. "Not even close," she said. "This family's been broken for years. You're just the only one brave enough to stop pretending it isn't." That sentence split something open. She told me she'd distanced herself from them decades ago, not because she hated them, but because she refused to bury her truth to make them more comfortable. She saw the way they handled emotion, treated independence as defiance, wielded silence like punishment. And she saw it being done to me, has seen it, for years. "They think empathy is weakness," she said, pouring more tea. "They confuse boundaries with betrayal. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you were never going to play the game." My shoulders finally dropped. I hadn't realized how long I'd held myself in. Shrinking, apologizing, trying not to be too much. But in her house, I didn't feel like a liability. I just felt recognized. That day, I showered, changed into her oversized sweater, and sat on her porch while the wind rattled leaves above us. For the first time in days, I felt solid. And for the first time in years, I wasn't alone. There was a quiet hour after our talk where we just existed. Me, on the porch in her sweater, with a mug of tea I kept forgetting to drink, and Corinne inside, humming as she watered her plants. It was peaceful in a way that hurt, the kind of quiet that makes the chaos you've left behind feel even louder. Later, once the sun had lowered and the kettle had boiled again, she came back out, sat across from me, and said plainly, "So how long are we going to ignore the fact that this might not actually be about you?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, elbows on knees, no judgment in her gaze. Just a sharpening focus. "I mean, yes, they've been emotionally manipulative for years," she said. "But cutting you off like that? Out of nowhere? It's not just about some tension at dinner or skipped birthdays." She paused. "When was the last time you spoke to Grandma?" "Before she passed." Something twisted in my chest. "A week before," I said. "She had me come over. We had tea. She gave me this old music box she used to wind up for me when I was little. Said she was tired lately. Kept holding my hand. I didn't know that'd be the last time. Corinne smiled softly, eyes watering just enough that she had to blink fast. I visited her 2 days after that. She said she'd changed her paperwork. Her will? I asked, suddenly sitting up straighter. Corinne nodded. Didn't go into detail, but she said you had become something to her. A safe place, someone who actually listened. She was worried, I could tell. Anxious that when she passed, people would go after whatever she left. And she told me, I've put protections in place. I gave her power of attorney. She doesn't even know yet. I dropped my spoon into my tea. Wait, what? Corinne reached beside her chair where she'd stashed a pale yellow folder, thick, bent at the corners, and placed it on my lap. She didn't say anything. Just waited. I flipped it open and found copies of everything. A notarized power of attorney, a modification in Grandma's living trust, and, most shocking, a letter addressed to me in my grandmother's uneven script. Dated 2 months before she passed, my mouth dried. If you're holding this, it began, then I trust Corinne's judgment and yours. I needed to know you'd be okay. I know life hasn't always felt like home, and I'm sorry if I added to that. But what I'm leaving you isn't wealth. It's protection, and maybe a chance to shape something better for yourself. I wiped my cheeks and kept reading. The documents confirmed it. Not only did I have power of attorney in the final month of her care, but there was also a clause that shifted most of her liquid assets, stocks, bonds, savings, from a shared family fund into a trust with me as the primary controller. I was never told. No lawyer had contacted me. No post-funeral revelations. No reading of the will, nothing. Did they know? I asked quietly. Corinne nodded. I think they must have found out shortly after the funeral. Someone got curious or greedy. That's when things got weird, right? I thought back. Yes. That was when the missed calls from my uncle began. When Mom's tone changed. When I started getting looped out of holiday plans entirely. They see you as the threat now, she said. Not the broken one. The powerful one. But why wouldn't they just talk to me about it? I asked, still spinning. Corinne laughed dryly. Because they don't want to ask. They want to control. Talking admits you have leverage. Pretending they're the victims lets them manipulate the narrative. I looked down at the folder again, where the letter ended with a simple line. If things get ugly, don't let them twist you. This is yours. Use it wisely. I had walked into Corinne's house thinking I was the abandoned one. Turns out I was just the one who got chosen, and they couldn't stand it. Corinne didn't waste time. After I read the documents she had, she stood, picked up her keys, and said, We're going for a drive. The lawyer's office was downtown, tucked between a boutique candle shop and some overpriced smoothie place. Corinne told me on the way there that he'd been Grandma's estate attorney for nearly 2 decades, trusted, discreet, probably the only person left not sucked into the black hole my family had turned into. I remember sitting in the passenger seat trying to keep myself steady. There was a part of me still hoping this was all a misunderstanding, that someone just forgot to call, that maybe the will had been read and I'd just missed it because people were grieving, that none of this was as dark as it was starting to feel. But when we sat in that leather-scented office and Mr. Chalmers, all gray hair, wire rims and calm professionalism, looked at me and said, I've been wondering when you'd come in. I felt the floor shift beneath me. He knew. He remembered my name. Motioned to the paperwork on his desk as if it had been waiting. Elaine, your grandmother, made several modifications to her estate plan in the last year of her life. She named you as personal representative for a number of items. Do you know what's been disclosed so far? Corinne shook her head. We have reason to believe the family intercepted or withheld something post-funeral. He hummed, didn't look surprised. Just retrieved a binder from a drawer and slid it toward me. That wouldn't be the first time, I'm afraid. The documents were clear. My grandmother had listed me as the sole beneficiary of her coastal property. A modest but beautiful old home she'd often referred to as her peace place. In addition, she had named me the trustee of a long-untouched savings account, designated originally for family emergencies, which had grown quietly into a near 6-figure sum. My parents had been named in earlier versions of the will, But those versions had clearly, legally been replaced, all signed, all notarized, all legitimate, but apparently never acknowledged. No formal estate reading occurred? Mr. Chalmers asked. I blinked. Should there have been? He raised his eyebrows. Usually, yes, especially when there are structural changes. Did anyone from the family ask you to attend a reading or receive a summary? I shook my head. They told me everything was handled, I said. That Grandma didn't leave much. That it was mostly going to be divided informally. Corinne let out a laugh, sharp and humorless. Mr. Chalmers sighed and began making copies. You're well within your rights to request an audit, you know. A probate inquiry, if necessary. I sat there, trying to breathe. These weren't abstract numbers. This was real in a house, an account, a final batch of decisions made by the only person in the family who had ever looked me straight in the eye and made me feel real, and they buried it, literally, right, along with her. Corinne placed her hand over mine gently. They didn't think you'd question it. Or maybe they assumed you'd never walk into this office, that you'd let them tell the story and walk away, ashamed. I looked up at Mr. Chalmers. So what happens now? He smiled kindly. Now? We notify, legally, quietly for now if that's your wish. But everything your grandmother gave you is already yours. We're just dusting it off. Later, while we were walking back to the car, Corinne said nothing for a moment. Then she turned to me with a smirk. Well, she said, no wonder they wanted you to step away. We both laughed, not fully, not freely, but enough, because now it was starting to make sense. The sudden exile, the weaponized silence, the group text. They weren't trying to cut loose dead weight. They were trying to erase the one person Grandma had trusted to carry her legacy. That night back at Corinne's, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurting, I was. But something had shifted in me. The hurt had sharp edges now, and those edges were starting to cut a shape. There was focus behind the pain. Direction. Corinne made tea again, something with lemon balm and ginger, then pulled out a notebook from her desk and handed it to me. You're going to need this, she said. Start writing everything down. Dates, texts, names, conversations. Get organized. If they were bold enough to cut you out, they'll be bold enough to twist the truth when it comes back for them. It wasn't just about legality anymore. It was about story. My story. So I wrote the day they sent the group message. The screenshots sent by Jamie. The exact phrases they used. Then I pulled out my phone and began taking screenshots of every message I'd saved. All the subtle digs. I'd previously just scrolled past and dismissed as insecurity or bad timing, now read like brushstrokes in a quiet masterpiece of manipulation. I wrote down when I'd visited Grandma last. What we talked about. The way she held my hand and looked at me like she saw more than I thought I was showing. Corinne walked by and glanced at my page, then said softly, she saw the part of you they refused to meet. The spirit, the softness, the voice that asked better questions. She paused. That's why she picked you. I don't know why that line hit the way it did, but I had to put down my pen. All my life, I'd watched family pick the loudest, the most put together, the flashiest, the ones who lined up for approval and wore obedience like a crown. I'd never been that. I'd been the one who asked why, who paused, who watched, who took in the silences and left the room when things turned fake. I thought that made me the outlier. The burden, the disappointment, but now, those same traits made me the heir. Not just to a house or a bank account, to her trust, to her memories. Her name, her final deliberate decisions. Corinne sat across from me, reading her own notes. She was already thinking ahead, tax filings, legal notices, title transfers. But I wasn't quite there yet. I was sitting in the middle of something sacred, a reclamation. Grandma didn't leave me this to hurt the family. She left it because she knew they would hurt me, and she wanted me to have something they couldn't twist. Something that said, you're not wrong for being you. I stayed up late that night, scanning my notes, printing emails, backing up messages. If storm clouds were coming, I wanted lightning rods in place. But strangely, I wasn't scared. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't grieving someone who left me behind. I was carrying out the wishes of someone who believed I deserved to stand in the center. His message came in the middle of a quiet morning. I was sitting at Corinne's kitchen table, half focused on my coffee, rereading trust documents and drafting a list of questions for Mr. Chalmers. The sunlight was soft, the house calm. I felt, for once, anchored in a chapter that wasn't clawing at me from all sides. Then my phone lit up. From Ashley, cousin, a screenshot. I didn't even click it right away. Ashley never messaged me directly, hadn't in over a month. Probably since before all this started. But my thumb hovered, and when I finally opened it, everything else around me blurred. It was a screen capture of a group chat. Not our family group text, a second private one. One I was clearly not meant to be in. At the top, fam circle. Below, comments like knives. Uncle Rob, we need to make sure she doesn't see the Merrill account. That transfer was supposed to be temporary, and aged assets aren't technically hers yet. My mom, Corinne, needs to back off. She's stirring things up. If we get her to step back, we can handle everything privately. Ashley, exactly. We remove the narrative. Make her look like she's emotional again. Mom always says she self-destructs if you wait. My stomach flipped. Emotional again? Remove the narrative? They weren't just pushing me away because I upset someone. They weren't just hurt or misinformed or avoiding conflict. This was strategy. Calculations, coordinated language about me, about my aunt, discussing money that belonged to my grandmother, like vultures whispering beside a covered dish. Corinne must have seen my face change, because she looked up from her reading and said, "Talk to me." I handed her the phone. She read it once. Her mouth pressed into a sharp line. Then again, slower this time. "I knew it," she said, standing. "They're trying to erase paper trails. If we'd waited another few weeks, they might have drained those funds. Hell, they still might try." My hands were ice cold. Rage hadn't even entered yet. I was stuck in shock. My mother had implied that I was unstable. Like I was someone prone to falling apart when taken seriously. Like I couldn't possibly be trusted with what my grandmother legally left to me. To them, this wasn't about family anymore. It was about control, reputation, access, money. I looked back at the screen. I couldn't tell if Ashley had sent it on purpose or not. It could have been an accident, meant for someone else, or maybe a slip of conscience. But either way, she had peeled the veil off. They weren't excluding me because I caused problems. They were excluding me so I wouldn't notice theirs. Corinne was already on the phone, calling Chalmers, requesting immediate confirmation of account freeze protocols, and setting up a full audit. Her voice was calm, furious, but focused. When she hung up, she looked at me and said, "They're not going to like what happens next." I barely nodded, still clutching my phone, because in that moment, something crystallized for me. They never thought I'd fight back. They thought I'd sulk, cry behind closed doors, spiral, fade. The sensitive one, the dramatic girl. But now that title was about to cost them everything they quietly clawed for, and deep down, I think they knew it. It was Corinne's idea, but I sent the invites. Soft, polite, impossible to refuse. Aunt Corinne wanted to host a small family dinner. Just to talk and maybe start fresh. Thursday at 6 p.m. at Grandma's house. No threats. No drama, just a gentle bait, wrapped in nostalgia, and every single one of them took it. They thought this was a healing attempt. They probably imagined I'd be tearful, begging for understanding, eager to smooth things over so I could be welcomed back into the fold. But I wasn't the same girl who curled up in bed reading group texts through blurry eyes. This time, I was the one with the keys. The table was already set when the guests started arriving. Corinne insisted the old maple dining table was perfectly symbolic. It was the one Grandma had bought in the 80s, the same one from childhood Thanksgivings. The one where I used to sneak butter rolls before dinner. Now, it was polished to a shine and decked with red linen napkins, white candles, and antique silverware. Peaceful, regal. I watched them trickle in one by one. Ashley smiled, awkwardly, clearly trying to read my face. Mom hugged me stiffly, as though she were playing a part and not entirely sure of her lines. Dad offered a silent nod, eyes scanning the house like he expected something to jump out at him. Everyone sat, and Corinne stood behind her chair with all the authority of a woman who had seen through every lie before it was even told. "We just wanted to reconnect," Corinne began cheerfully. "Feels like too much has been left unsaid since Elaine passed." I let them all settle into the illusion for a few minutes. Warm bread, soft laughter, fake small talk that dripped like syrup over shattered porcelain. I played my role. Gentle smiles, vague nods. Let them get comfortable, then I stood. "I'm glad you're all here," I said, "because there's something I need to share. Something Grandma wanted." 11 heads turned, picked up the folder from the empty seat beside me, hers, and opened it on the table, slowly, carefully, like unveiling a relic. Mom stiffened. "First, I spoke to Mr. Chalmers," I said calmly, "and he helped me access some things I hadn't been told, including updated paperwork regarding ownership and estate decisions." You could feel the oxygen leaving the room. "The house," I said, fingers brushing the edges of the deed, "has been legally transferred into my name, per Grandma's amended will, signed and notarized prior to her passing." A pause, a flicker. Dad shifted slightly in his seat. Ashley looked like she couldn't decide whether to act innocent or indignant. My uncle cleared his throat a little too loudly. Mom made the mistake of speaking first. "I thought we agreed everything would be divided equally." "No," I replied softly. "You told me everything had already been handled," which I now know wasn't true. Corinne backed me up smoothly. There were clear attempts to hide asset designations. We've already submitted preliminary fraud notices with a probate lawyer. It was quiet chaos, too frozen for yelling, but wild beneath the surface. Eye twitches, glances passed between husbands and wives, cracks forming without a single voice rising above conversational tone. I didn't need to raise mine. My silence did the work, and then came the knife twist. "This house isn't just mine by law," I continued, eyes tracking every flinch. "It's where Grandma and I had our last conversation. It's where she told me how grateful she was that someone in the family still listened, still loved her for who she was." I looked directly at Mom. She didn't make this decision out of spite. She made it out of faith. I let them sit with that. Every fork stayed on the plate. No one touched the roast chicken. They were sitting in a house they thought they could silently collect and disperse. A house they thought had already been folded into their portfolios. But they were sitting at my table now. There was no shouting. No dramatic exits. Just one, slow unraveling of entitlement, and that was enough. Corinne didn't need a podium. She just pulled out a neatly folded sheet of paper from an old envelope, straightened it beside her plate, and said, almost gently, "Before we eat, there's something I promised Elaine I'd share, at the right time. That time is now." There was movement around the table, subtle, unnerved. Ashley shifted in her seat. Uncle Rob set his glass down a little too hard. My mother narrowed her eyes but said nothing. My father's jaw clenched just once. Corinne unfolded the page carefully. "This is an excerpt from Elaine's amended will, signed and notarized 9 months before her death. These changes relate specifically to direct inheritance, asset distribution, and property control." And then she read it, not loudly, not with drama, just clearly, cleanly, like it had weight all on its own. "To my granddaughter, who has shown me patience, presence, and peace, you are not just my blood. You are my home. I leave to you my house, my savings, my trust accounts, the things I built not just for comfort, but for protection. I trust you to use them wisely, to be a better steward than those who took without asking, who watched without seeing." Every word landed like a steel pin dropping in the middle of bone china. Corinne continued, her voice unwavering as she listed them, line by line. The savings accounts, the investment portfolio holdings, the antique jewelry, the coastal property. All of it itemized, all of it willed directly to me, not in parts, not to be divided, not as family property. Mine. At that point, my mother made a small, dry noise in the back of her throat. She looked at my father, then at me, like maybe I'd rescind it all if she could just find the right words. But she said none. My father stood slowly. "This isn't... We were told..." "Yes," I said. You told me everything was taken care of. But Grandma made other decisions. Legal ones. He looked at Corinne. You should have told us. Corinne didn't flinch. I told Elaine I'd wait until everything was filed properly. I honored her timeline, just like I honored her life, even when the rest of you started carving it up before the dirt settled. My mother stared at the document as if it might rewrite itself from sheer disbelief. Then she stood too, quietly, not even looking at me. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask how. She just walked toward the door like she'd been caught stealing silverware from a dinner party and couldn't decide if she was ashamed or still entitled to it. My father followed. Neither said goodbye. Around the table, no one spoke. The silence wasn't respectful. It was resentful, stunned, wounded, humiliated. But in that silence, I felt taller. Because for once, they were the ones who didn't know what to say. For once, they held the uncertainty, the rejection, the unexpected outcome. This was their unraveling, not mine. Corinne folded the will again and set it gently beside her. Then she picked up her wine glass and looked around. Well, thank you all for coming. Dinner's still warm. No one left immediately, but everyone ate like the food had turned to ash in their mouths. The weight of my grandmother's words and choices settled over that table like a second ghost. And finally, I understood what it meant to be seen not just with love, but with belief. They showed up just past 9. I heard the knock before I saw the headlights glowing at the edge of the gravel drive. Corinne had already retired to her reading room for the night, leaving me alone in the living room with a cup of tea and my thoughts. The air in the house was still wrapped in the echo of everything that had just happened. The reveal, the look in their eyes, the silence between sentences that used to be love. I opened the front door, and there they were, my parents, standing awkwardly on the porch like two people trying to figure out how to knock on a stranger's door. Hey, my mom said, voice higher than usual. We thought maybe we could just talk for a minute. I leaned against the frame, blocking most of the doorway. It's late, Dad gave a short, almost laugh. Yeah, we know. That's partly why we came. We didn't want to drive all the way back tonight. Too many back roads. I didn't say anything. Just let the pause sit. I could see it all over them. They weren't here to apologize. They weren't here to confess. They were here because their carefully sewn plan had come apart in their hands at the table. And now, without fallback, they were scrambling for softer ground. We just figured, Mom added, forcing a smile. We could maybe spend the night here. Catch up in the morning. No pressure, just family. Family. An interesting word choice. The same word they used to justify keeping secrets. To ask for trust while holding a dagger. The same word they used to write me out of their lives. Casually, in a group message. And now here they were, standing on my porch, asking for my hospitality in a house they once tried to erase from me. Part of me wanted to scream. To drag out every cruel implication, every lie, every snap judgment they muttered behind closed chats and easy smiles. But as I looked at them, a little smaller now, unsure, stripped of their authority, I realized they didn't deserve a performance. They deserved truth. So I nodded slowly, took a breath and said, We think it's best you step away for now. The silence after those words was sharp and dazzling. My mother blinked. My father flinched just enough to betray the sting. I didn't shout. I didn't slam a door. I just used their own line, the one they thought would bury me. But I stood in the light of the porch, tall, calm, rooted, watching them process what it feels like to be politely discarded, to be told with a smile that the gate they once held, closed, is no longer theirs. They hesitated a moment longer like they were, waiting for me to cave. I didn't. Eventually, they turned and walked slowly back to their car. The gravel crunched beneath their feet, but not a single word was exchanged between them. When the headlights finally disappeared down the road, I closed the door, turned the lock, and finished my tea, still warm. They're all in a folder on my phone, labeled something quiet and forgettable, family notes, tucked between recipe screenshots and saved dog videos. Inside, a soft little archive of betrayal, the texts, the group chats, the screenshots Jamie sent, my mom's words, Ashley's snide comments, Dad's silence, Sometimes I open it, not to get angry, not to spiral, just to remember. Because it's easy now, in this house, with the sun pouring into my bedroom every morning and Corinne humming old soul music in the kitchen, to pretend it never happened. To pretend they were never loud about shutting me out, that they didn't measure my worth and convenience and then act shocked when I didn't stay silent. But those texts, they're proof, not just of what they did, but what I let them do for so long. I don't hate them. I think about that a lot. I don't burn with rage the way I did that first week. I don't imagine revenge or dream up dramatic confrontations. I've even stopped rehearsing conversations I'll probably never have. I've forgiven them. Not in a warm, fairy tale way, but in that real, cracked up kind of way where your heart no longer wants to carry the weight. Because I finally realized forgiveness isn't the same as reopening the door. It's just setting down the baggage and choosing not to drag it into the future. I've grown too much to stay mad. But I've also grown too much to ever let them back in. They've tried. Tiny efforts. A comment on an old post. A half-hearted thinking of you text from my mom 2 Sundays ago. Ashley liked an Instagram story. None of it came with a real apology. None of it acknowledged the silence, the exclusion, the plan they built behind my back while pretending to pray over holiday dinner. And that's how I knew they still didn't get it. So, no, they're not invited back. Not to birthdays, not to quiet coffees, not to my healing. Maybe one day they'll change. Maybe one day someone will mean it when they say, "I'm sorry." But even then, I'll keep my distance the way somebody who touched fire learns to keep their hands close, cautious. The screenshots stay, not because I love the anger, but because I love myself enough now not to forget how I found my voice, and how silent faces can become strangers, even when they once called themselves family. We sat on the porch just before sunset, tea in hand. The sky that soft gold it only turns for a few slow, perfect minutes. Corinne pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and tilted her head toward the empty rocking chair to our right, Grandma's old spot. It creaked a little in the breeze even without anyone in it. I used to think that sound was eerie. Now it made me feel watched, maybe even carried. She used to rock for hours, Corinne said, smiling down into her mug. Sometimes with a book, sometimes just daydreaming. I once asked her what she thought about all that time. You know what she told me? I looked over, waiting. Nothing I'm brave enough to say out loud yet. I don't know why, but my throat tightened. Corinne glanced sideways at me and bumped her shoulder into mine like an old friend. There's a reason she chose you, she said. Bravery runs quiet in our line, but it's strong. It doesn't always show up in centerpieces and speeches. Sometimes it looks like holding a boundary, or walking away, or standing alone at a table full of people who think they know better. I nodded, staring out at the small yard, the wind tiny and sharp, the grass humming as it moved. I keep wondering if she ever thought this would happen. I said, all this, the fight, the fallout, the silence. She didn't need to wonder, Corinne said softly. She knew. That's why she planned. That's why she didn't leave it to chance. There was something comforting about that my grandmother didn't just love me, she trusted me enough to act. To decide I was worth protecting, even if it meant upsetting the family system. Maybe that was the quiet thread I hadn't pulled on yet. This wasn't just a feud. It was a correction. Something broken got exposed, and nobody could pretend they didn't see the cracks anymore, least of all me. A hummingbird buzzed by, quick and defiant, just a blur of green against the lavender bush. Corinne followed it with her eyes, then said, You know, Elaine used to say we came from fighters, survivors, quiet rebels. She saw it in you. I didn't answer right away. Just breathed in the air, let my heart settle. Despite the aftermath, despite the loss, I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel disposable. I felt intended. That old house behind us, the accounts in my name, the inheritance no one could snatch. It wasn't just safety. It was proof someone saw my fight and said, that one deserves room to grow. I looked over at the porch steps, at all the shoes that had once sat there, waiting for family dinners, none of which felt like home anymore. And then I said it. The truth I hadn't said out loud until now. She didn't just leave me the keys. Corinne looked at me, waiting. I smiled. She left me a way out.